Hello and welcome to the Quickstart guide for iOS using a SwiftUI project. Today we're going to be taking a look at a demo project that has some basic functionality and integrating Adapty into it so that you can show a paywall and process the purchase from your customer. First thing we'll do is run the app real quick just so you can see what it looks like. As you can see, it's called Focus Journal, and it's a very simple app, just a couple of screens. Its goal is to allow users to capture their thoughts on a day-to-day basis and save those entries and then view them later. So what we've done is we've set it up so that you can enter your thoughts if you like, and you can then save that entry. But if you want to view your history, you need to go here to the View History button, and we lock that behind a paywall. So in this first version of the demo app, we're just kind of stubbing that out. We're not actually integrating Adapty or anything else to do that. So this is just a plain screen with a button on it that just simply unlocks the functionality the first time. And the next time that you launch into the history, it then shows you the history of the entries that you've made so far. So really it's just a scaffolding that we've created in order to show you how to integrate Adapty into the project. If we jump into the home view, you can see it's pretty straightforward. Essentially, we have down here in the button, we just check to see the button that activates the history. If the profile manager is showing that we have a premium access, we're showing the history, and if we don't, we're showing the paywall instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to integrate Adapty into the project, and then we're going to replace this dummy paywall with an actual paywall so that we can have real paid functionality in our application. The first thing you want to do as we convert this is we are going to need a couple of constants in order to be able to facilitate this. So I'm going to bring in a new file called AppConstants. It has a place to store the API key, the access level ID, and the placement ID. Those are kind of the three main things that you'll need in order to display a paywall in your app with Adapty. The API key gets you access to the API overall with Adapty. The access level ID is the access level that you want to grant. You can have multiples. The default is premium, but you can have multiple access levels if you like. And then placement ID is an identifier that tells you where within the app you want to show the paywall. And every single one of those has its own individual ID. The next thing you want to do is go into, in this case, the app main file, the main struct for this focus journal. And we want to start to actually integrate the Adapty SDK. So we're going to import the Adapty and AdaptyUI frameworks. And then we need to set it up to initialize the Adapty frameworks from within the init function of the main struct. So to do that, we're just going to go into the init function, make some space, and paste in this code that will set up and configure and activate the Adapty SDK. So basically, it's just feeding the API key that we have saved in our constants file into an Adapty configuration builder, and then passing that builder into an Adapty call called activate that will go off and talk to the server and activate this app in the SDK with the Adapty servers, and that will register this application as using the Adapty SDK with your specific account. And then the AdaptyUI activate is a similar structure that's designed to activate the AdaptyUI framework, and we need that in order to be able to display paywall builder style paywalls. All right, so first things first, we need to go and actually install the Adapty SDK into our project. So we're going to go here to the Focus Journal project, and then go to the project over here on the left, and package dependencies, and then hit the plus button, and you'll see a whole bunch of packages probably that you've used before in other projects. If you don't already have the Adapty SDK URL in there, you can paste it directly in. So you're going to paste up here in this search box the full URL, and it should find it for you. If you use it at least once, it's going to show up in the recents, and you can just pick from there as well, either way. So once you have the Adapty SDK-iOS package selected, we're going to hit Add Package. And then here, it gives you the opportunity to take the libraries that are included within that SDK and choose whether to add them to your app target. The ones that we're going to use today are going to be the Adapty package and then the AdaptyUI package. So for both, you're going to want to say Add to Target and then choose, in this case, if you're following along with the tutorial, Focus Journal, and otherwise you're going to want to pick your app's target and then hit Add Package. That should download and install the Adapty package here. You can see under Package Dependencies. As of the creation of this tutorial, we're at 3.8.0. It may be a newer version than that by the time you use this tutorial, but that's okay. Just grab the latest one. Now that we have the Adapty SDK configured and activated as part of the app's main launch, we want to go into our profile manager, which is a observable class that we've created to just manage the profile of your user and understand their subscription status. So in the sort of initial version of the starter project, it's just kind of doing some mocking and some basic stuff. We're going to enhance this now to actually use the Adapty SDK to know genuinely about the profile of that particular user and whether or not they're subscribed. So the first thing to do would be to import the Adapty framework at the top of the file. And then we need to bring in a couple of different things to help us understand whether the user's profile, like what it looks like and whether they're subscribed. So underneath these first couple of properties, I'm going to make some space and paste in a customer profile property that is actually has a did set on it, and we'll talk about that in just a minute about what that does. All right, so we need to go ahead and install some functions into this in addition to that customer profile property. One's called refreshProfile and one is called subscriptionPurchased. The refreshProfile can be run really anytime you want inside your application to determine the latest and freshest profile for your user. So when you do that, it's going to call out to the Adapty SDK and go get one from the server, and that will contain the latest, most up-to-date information about their subscription status, in addition to all of the other properties that are stored there. And then the other one is used specifically when a purchase happens inside the app. We want to update the profile with the profile we just received as part of the transaction, so we can make sure, again, the profile manager has the latest information about the subscription status. In either case, we're just setting that value, and then up here in the did set, we're kind of looking through the profile specifically at the access levels, specifically at the access level that we care about, from the ID from the constants, and then we're checking the status on that to see if it's either active, in a grace period, or lifetime. So active hopefully makes sense. That just means they've paid and are an active subscriber. Grace period means if you've enabled grace periods in your iOS App Store Connect profile, you are allowing the user to have a bit of extra time to figure out their billing issue before it cancels their subscription. And so if you have that activated, you can check for that, and then that you can still allow them to have premium access. Or if you have enabled lifetime access through your own ability to change that in the Adapty dashboard for that particular user, they might just have lifetime access anyway. And so you can check for that as well. So feel free to check for some or all of these to determine eligibility to the premium access, content access, whether you want to allow it or not. And so we're checking for all three. If it's the case, if any of them are true, we're going to mark the whole thing as true. And otherwise, we're going to mark premium as false. So the cool thing with this is we don't really have to dig through this every time. We can just simply check is premium in other parts of our application as a simple Boolean. And then anytime the customer profile gets updated, we know that it's going to automatically update the is premium status to whatever the correct thing should be. So now we have the ability to refresh the profile and get fresh status on things like the subscription and whether or not they've paid and have access to premium features or not. We want to run that every time the app launches so we can have an up-to-date understanding of the user's subscription status. So let's jump back over to the main app struct. And then down here where we present the content view inside the window group, and we inject our profile manager as an environment variable, we want to add a task to that as well that will go out to the profile manager and run that refresh profile. And as we saw a second ago, that will update the customer profile, and then it will automatically find within that profile the access level and then either enable or disable the premium features based on whether or not they're subscribed. Okay, so now we have the Adapty SDK installed, and we can also check the user's profile to see if they're subscribed or not. The next thing to do would be to actually give them the ability to pay, right? To actually see a paywall and complete a purchase. So to do that, we're going to go into the HomeView in this case for this app. This is where we've gated off functionality, right? So in the screen, we're letting you enter journal entries, but we're not letting you view the history unless you pay. And so we want to trigger a paywall on that button, that history view button, depending on whether or not they've paid or not already. So the first thing we need to do with the HomeView is import the Adapty frameworks. So we're going to put there at the top both the Adapty and AdaptyUI framework. That's because we're going to be using a paywall builder, remotely configured paywall, and so that's part of the AdaptyUI framework. So that specifically needs to be added. The next thing we need to do is set up a new property inside of our HomeView. So we're going to add this new property, paywall config. and it is it's off of AdaptyUI, and it's the paywall configuration object. So this is an object that we're going to set, and it's going to contain all of the configuration we need to show a remotely configured paywall. Next thing we need to do down here in the body of the view is to actually set up a task to go and fetch that paywall configuration so that we're ready to go to launch the paywall whenever the user chooses to by tapping that history button. We don't really know when that's going to happen, so we want to pre-flight this information, get it local to our device, and have it all loaded and ready to go so that when and if they choose to hit that button and they need to show a paywall, we have the data right there available for them. So I'm going to go here right above the sheet presentations and paste in this task. And that's going to do a couple things. I'm going to check to see if if we already have premium status. If we do, then we don't need to bother with this because they've already paid, right? But if they have not paid, if they're not premium, then we're going to go fetch the paywall based on the placement ID. So we're pulling that out of the constants once again. And then once we have the paywall itself, we need to feed the paywall object into this AdaptyUI get paywall configuration call that will actually set us up to show a paywall builder paywall whenever we want to. So we're going to get the configuration and then just store that in that property that we defined at the top of the file so that we can use it whenever the user decides to see the paywall. All right, so in the starter project, we had the ability to kind of fake the paywall. We just had a mock presentation of a paywall that just has a button that automatically unlocks it for purposes of demo. That's right here. This sheet presentation is showing paywall that has a button that then shows a very simple screen with just a simple button in it. We're going to delete this because we don't need this anymore. We're actually going to replace this with a real paywall presentation. So I'm going to delete that sheet presentation from the body. And in its place, I'm going to add instead, above the task that we just put in, I'm going to add this modifier instead that is a bit non-standard, but I'll go through what this is doing. Essentially, what we want to do is we want to modify the view to present a paywall using Adapty's paywall modifier, view modifier called Paywall. The issue is that in order to be able to do that, you need to pass in a non-optional paywall config object. The problem is at runtime, when this application loads and this view loads, that paywall config may or may not actually be there because it's an optional property at the top, as you can see, and we're only doing it as an asynchronous task after the body loads. So it's very possible that that won't exist right when the view gets defined and it shows up. And so we need to be able to unwrap that optional and pass it in when necessary, but otherwise not. So if we go over here to View Plus, this is just a simple extension, a view builder extension that allows you to pass in an optional value. And if the value is not optional, if it has a real value, it's going to unwrap it and then transform the view with the view modifier you provided. And if the optional is nil, then it's just going to do essentially nothing. It's not going to make the transformation, and it's not going to apply the view modifier that you define. So what we're saying is off of the view, we want to add this modifier called .paywall, but we only want to do that if the paywall config variable, that property, is a true value, if it's real, if it's not nil. So we're saying if let paywall config, right? That's the name of that property. If that exists, transform the view by adding this this view modifier to present a paywall. And it passes in two things: the view that you are modifying, and also the unwrapped object that you were checking. So in this case, the paywall config. So we're going to call .paywall on it. We're going to use a pretty standard modal presentation with a property, right, a Boolean property telling us whether or not we're presenting the paywall. And then you have a bunch of different choices you can pick from to further customize it. The minimum things here are going to be the paywall config. You want to pass that in. And then there are various completions closures that we're using to define various outcomes. So when the paywall gets presented to the user, they're going to see the paywall, whatever design you've created inside of Adapty, and then they're going to be able to choose buttons and hit subscribe and do all that kind of fun stuff, or cancel, whatever it might be. And so the app needs to understand what happens with that paywall after all that work is completed. And so that's what these callbacks are for. We have did finish purchase, we have did fail purchase. Hopefully those make sense. Did finish is success. Did fail is something went wrong. Did finish restore and did fail restore. Again, same thing. They've either hit the restore button and it worked, or they've hit the restore button and it failed for some reason. And then lastly, there's a did fail rendering, and that would be due to some kind of rendering problem with the paywall itself. So within the Adapty SDK, there was some issue with the way that the paywall was trying to be rendered and it could not, and so it failed and produced an error. So in all these cases, you want to do at least basic error handling. You can see here, got some to-dos here for you as you're implementing Adapty into your own app. You want to do some error handling and perhaps show alternatives. We have the ability to show fallback paywalls that are local to your device, so you can research that and see about potentially showing those. But at a minimum, do some error handling, and then also make sure, since this is a modal presentation, that you are finishing out the modal, so setting the, in this case, the is showing paywall boolean to false to make the modal disappear. And in the case of a did finish purchase with success, we want to take the profile that was provided to us as part of that and send it into the ProfileManager to indicate that we were successful and that we were able to purchase something. So that goes over to ProfileManager and sets up the customer profile. And then again, we kind of do that check to see, are we now a paid subscriber? If we are, we unlock the is premium, set it to true. Otherwise, it's false. So pretty easy. All you have to do is just sort of send that in and it'll do the rest for you. And then you can use that Boolean, like I said, is premium, to decide whether or not to unlock premium functionality within your application. And from here, what happens is, if you look in the button, we have ProfileManager.isPremium, right? So now that we've got this fully implemented, it's going to hopefully show the paywall the first time we press the button because they're not subscribed. We're going to allow them to subscribe, and then that will trigger the is premium to become true. And the next time they hit the history button, then we'll actually show the history itself because we're checking for that presence or absence of that premium functionality through our profile manager. So that would be how you could also do that in your app, set something up so that you're monitoring those access levels and then just gating your premium content behind some kind of a Boolean or some kind of indicator that they have or have not paid for that premium access. Here's an example of the final product in action. When the user hits the View History button, a Paywall Builder paywall appears and allows them to complete a transaction. Once the purchase is complete, we use the access level to unlock the premium functionality. Now let's set a focus for today. And when we hit the View History button, the previously locked screen is now available. Thanks for watching.